Hello everyone and welcome to another video. Now, as I was clearing out a few older PC parts, I found this old Core 2 Duo, a dual-core CPU from early 2008. The E8400 here was one of my favourites and it seemed very popular, and with a clock speed of 3 GHz, it certainly was no slouch. 12 years ago anyway. Today, I thought I'd pair it with my GTX 1660 Ti. Now, I did try the 5700 XT, but AMD's top tier offering had somewhat of a mini meltdown the second it touched the socket 775 motherboard, and we got repeated driver errors. No surprise there. Now, for most modern games, the E8400 or anything from the Core 2 Duo range, or anything that has 2 cores and is at least 10 years old, just simply won't cut it. This video was just for a bit of a laugh and I was curious to see what it could handle. Spoiler alert, not much. And even though Red Dead Redemption 2 teased us with a glimpse of the in-game loading screen, it wasn't long before we were back at the desktop because it had crashed. It's not all bad though, and in some cases this now sub £5 chip will surprise you, or at least it surprised me. Now, I'm not for one moment saying you should buy one of these, in fact quite the opposite, but exploring the limits and potential of old hardware sometimes brings with it a few I was not expecting that moments. So my adventure began with Crysis 3. Yes, it's a horrible laggy mess, and yes, the average frame rate was shy of 30, even at the lowest in-game settings at 1080p, but I soon discovered that even at 4K, the game still ran with very similar performance figures, and I just had to run with it. Now, I apologise if you can see the gameplay footage speeding up or slowing down quite erratically. Now, this wasn't actually present in the gameplay itself. This seems to be an effect of either the recording or the rendering or something. It was only present in Premiere Pro and after I exported the video, so I can't quite explain it. But yeah, it wasn't like this during actual gameplay. The only thing that occurred during actual gameplay was the horrendous lag. At 2160p, the GPU load is increased, and naturally under normal circumstances the frame rate will drop. In this situation, the E8400 is holding us back anyway, so regardless of the resolution, it's already maxing out, so to speak. At 4K then, with the E8400 and 1660 Ti, the average FPS and 1% low wasn't that different, and with this in mind, I tried out a few more games. Don't get me wrong, this card isn't exactly meant for 4K gaming either, but that's sort of irrelevant in this situation when we have a snail in place of where a processor should be. Okay, that's just mean, it's rude to insult such a legend, but let's move on. In Dirt Rally 2, I'd done a few laps of a time trial race, and at 1080p medium, the average frame rate was recorded at 46 with a respectable 1% and 0.1% lows. There was no stutter to speak of, though I'm sure results may vary in a heavily populated race, and overall I was surprised by this 12-year-old 12-core I wish it had 12 cores. This 12-year-old 2-core processor. When I switched the resolution to 4K, we lost a few frames, that's for certain, but we still managed at least 40 FPS on average with decent enough percentile figures. Take a quick look at a few moments from this lap. As you can see, it was a pretty satisfying result. I should also mention at this point that I'm using just 8 gigs of 667 MHz DDR2 RAM, as it's all I had on hand at the time of recording. For the next few results, I dumped 1080p altogether and just stuck to 2160p, that is until we get to the Outer Worlds a little later on. CSGO, a CPU-intensive game, will struggle to maintain a solid frame rate, averaging around the mid-40s, but also demonstrating some horrible percentile figures. The footage you see is from a bot match for convenience sake, but the figures were taken from a match played on the Dust 2 map online. In a competitive situation, the frame rate here probably won't be enough for most. I mean, you could still probably take on a few bots successfully if you're a better player than me, and that isn't really too difficult. In first-person shooters, I like to see as close to 60 FPS as possible, and with all the stutters that were occurring here, well, it may hinder your competitive online abilities, or at least you can blame it on the performance if, like me, you're not very good. See, if this performed at 60 FPS, I'd win every time. Forgive the lack of on-screen analytics in Skyrim Special Edition here, MSI Afterburner seemed to have just given up, which is surprising because I was sure that if anything was going to bite the dust, it was the processor. During the opening half hour or so of this game, the frame rate remained okay, but the experience in towns and such may differ, especially as you venture into far busier areas. The opening level though seemed to do okay, you know, where the dragon comes down, destroys the town, but sorry for the spoilers, I'm sure most of you have played Skyrim, so yeah, for the first half an hour or so the game will run fine. What happens after that, well, is anyone's guess. While we're on the subject of open world RPGs, let's talk about Kingdom Come Deliverance. Now this game also ran, which was unexpected. My excitement, unlike the potholes that still remain outside my house, was swiftly paved over though when I noticed that every 1 or 2 seconds the game froze for about 3 seconds. To be honest, I went into this expecting very little, so it's hard to be disappointed. Going back a few years now, and we have Metro 2033 Exodus, a 2014 remaster of the original 2010 hit. I tested the game in a couple of areas, the first of which being a sparsely populated outdoor zone. 43 was the average figure with 1% and 0.1% lows of 21 and 16 respectively. Not too much stutter to report, but a 30 FPS cap or lock wouldn't go amiss here. The chaotic indoor level here fared a little better, but as with all games, don't expect a CPU like this to maintain solid results throughout. The chosen area, the location you're at on the map, and of course the settings will all affect the frame rate, and with a chip like this, those factors matter more than ever, because you may find yourself hovering on the line between playable and unplayable. It is a dual-core CPU from 2008 after all, but honestly, it's putting up a decent fight today in some scenarios. So finally, we have the Outer Worlds. Now I absolutely love the Outer Worlds, but it's fair to say that it's not without its problems, and as expected, it had a few issues here. Now I actually bumped things down to 1440p with the E8400 and 1660 Ti. Although 4K resolution did work and we saw around 30 FPS on average, the stutter was just way too bad. It really wasn't playable. And as we dropped things down to 1440p, it really wasn't that much better, but it was better on paper. The first result here is filmed outside the town of Edgewater during the first hour of the game, as these open areas tend to fare a lot well better. I've switched to 2009 style recording as the capture footage really didn't like the combination of the CPU and this game for whatever reason. Now as we made our way inside Edgewater's walls, things became quite a bit worse. I also tested 1080p briefly, just like in Kingdom Come, but this was to no real avail. The fact that we could play the Outer Worlds on this old E8400 though surprised me quite a bit, and if you recall we tested a Core 2 Quad not long ago which also handled the game, it handled the game, it didn't do too well either, but it can still handle some games from within the last few years without issue, the E8400 that is, and Skyrim Special Edition as well as Dirt Rally 2, to name a couple, really do demonstrate that. Should you buy one of these chips? Probably not, but I guess you already knew that, though if you're looking to put together a PC with a tiny budget in mind and plan to play some older releases, then it might be worth your while. After all, you never know how something's going to perform until you test it. I guess there's still a market for everything hardware-wise, and for a couple of quid online it's hard to complain, plus you get to own a pretty legendary dual-core processor for a very small cost, so it might be worth adding to your collection just for the thrill of it. So there we have it, the Core 2 Duo E8400. It's not going to work miracles in 2020, but if you are browsing through your old game collection, you have one of these, it might be worth clicking play and seeing what happens, because in some cases, well, you might be very surprised. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this video. I'm going to keep this chip for another couple of years because honestly it is one of my favourites. Bear in mind that this was paired with a newer card as well, and of course pairing it with anything weaker will give you totally different results. I'm not sure how well 16 gigs of RAM would have helped. I should probably mention overclocking as well. Now I stuck to 3 GHz, the stock speed, in the test because I found that even bumping the clock speed up to say 3.6 GHz didn't really make any difference. That's just part and parcel of owning an old CPU like this. You'll find that in a lot of modern games, it doesn't really care about the clock speed. The limiting factor is the 2 cores, but there we go. I hope you've enjoyed nonetheless. If you did, leave a like down below. If you didn't, leave a dislike. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already, and hopefully I'll see all of you in the next one.